Hello, I'm Adrian Ashton, and welcome to this session about business plans and strategic plans. And chances are I'm already turning you off because let's be honest, business plans are not something that fill a lot of us with excitement, that make us think, oh, yes, please. It's not the latest page turning sensational novel that's coming out on the bookstores. And chances are you may already, as part of your induction or pre-induction packs of being a trustee or a trustee to be of the charity, received a copy of the business plans. And you may be thinking, okay, I'll have a kind of a skim through it, but is it really worth it? And actually, in all honesty, my experience of working with lots of charities over the last few decades is most trustees don't actually read the business plans. They aren't really involved in creating them because they're more concerned with, why don't we as a charity just get on and do stuff? Why do we need to do all this planning stuff? Why don't we just focus our energy on getting stuff done? So the idea of this session is to hopefully, by the end of it, give you a greater appreciation as to what the point of these plans are. What is actually the purpose of a business plan? How do we best use it? And then alongside that, there's these things called strategic plans, but surely they're the same thing, aren't they? In some ways they are, but in some ways they're very different. So we'll kind of clarify what they both are, how they're both used in different ways, and as trustees, how you can get the most out of them in your role of being a trustee. But firstly, let's kind of just do a bit of reality check. Hands up if you're watching this, if your experience of business plans, reading them, being involved in creating them, presenting them, is something like this on the screen right now. They just go on and on. They're not really engaging, quite hard to get through sometimes. It's hard to see the point of what's been written here with the community, the reality of our world. They don't seem to be the same thing. And then we wonder, is it worth it? You know, it's just another report that'll sit in a drawer and no one will ever read it or use it. So what's the point? Okay, we have these preconceptions in our head based on experience, because I have an idea that most business planning processes are done badly. And that's because we don't know why we're doing them. What's the point of having a business plan? If you don't know why you're doing it, why waste your time? Why not do something more exciting and useful? Okay, so what we want to do is actually look at, why might we bother creating a plan? So I've already kind of alluded to this in terms of that throwaway phrase, the business planning process. The process we go through is what's more important, I think, than the finished document. And that process is really important because for some of you, you will never have been a trustee before. For some of you, you have been a trustee before, but you've never been quite certain that you've been doing the right things or the charity's been working properly, which means you have suffered to a greater or lesser extent from what I call the gremlin of doubt that sits on your shoulder, usually at about 2:30 in the morning, whispering in your ear, it's all going to go wrong. It's going to crash and burn. Everyone's going to laugh at you. You've ruined not only your life, but everyone else's. What the hell do you think you're doing there? So the process is really important at making sure we're not missing anything obvious. It's like a checklist approach. It quells that gremlin, gives us an assurance we're okay, we've covered all the bases. The next reason that it may be useful to have a plan is because we want some money. And increasingly, whoever in the charity is responsible for leading on drafting and submitting funding applications, grant proposals, they'll say, oh, part of the supporting documentation, so as well as writing all of these great letters, these great responses to the questions that the funders are asking, where's our business plan? Because the funders want to see the business plan as a wider context for this project you're asking them for support with. It may also be useful to have a plan as what I call, again, throwaway terms, a reality checkpoint. And that's because at any given point, you as trustees will sit down and do some thinking ahead. What should the charity be doing next year? What should our long-term plans be? Should we be working more in partnership? Should we try and merge with other groups? As trustees, you're doing that strategic, big picture thinking stuff. And as a result, something that no one tells you, but I think is quite important, is that in that planning process stage, that thinking stage, you are in God mode. You are God collectively. Because in that time that you're going through, in that moment you're coming to these decisions, you control the world. You control how people will respond and react in your minds because you're making assumptions. You're working this through. The reality, unfortunately, is as those ideas, those strategies, those purposes get enacted, get played out, people are really rude and they don't behave as you thought they would or as they were supposed to in responding to these great things. So we make compromises. We make trade-offs here and there, and that's okay. Every day we make 1,000 decisions that are trading off one idea with another. We compromise because the world is big and messy. The challenge is, how do you know when you've compromised too far? When those 100 little trade-offs have actually been one too many? We need something that we can go back to say, this was actually how we thought it should be and how we wanted it to be. So every so often to go back to that plan and go, this was our big idea, how it should be working out. And we can see now, a year on, 2 years on, 6 months on, how we've had to adapt it. And is that okay? Is it okay that we've adapted it, or do we need to try and bring it back to our original thinking? So it's a reality check point. And yeah, again, the other purpose for business plans that can be quite useful, and I've mentioned this already, for those of you who are taking notes or been really good at picking stuff up, the little subliminal drops that I'm putting into this, is as an induction process. A business plan is a very easy and efficient way to say to a new volunteer, a new member of staff, a new trustee, a new partner to the charity, this is what we're about. This is our big picture idea, and this is how we are pursuing this and working it out. Okay, so it's very good use of time, and it's consistent. So rather than relying on saying, okay, well, Jim's going to give you the background, or Bala's going to give you the background, and they might forget something, or they'll remember the story slightly differently. It's consistent, so you know everyone's got that same information. So as you see, there's actually some really good reasons why we need to do a plan, and not only do a plan, but keep reviewing it, keep it active. Now, I'm not going to go through in this session or in the supporting files to go, here are all the templates for perfect business plan models, because there are 101 templates out there for charity business plans, none of which are designed with your charity in mind, but they're good starting points. What I want to do instead in this session is help you make sure that when you're creating a plan, it covers off what it should do. And that's on this checklist here. A good plan should describe what it is that's going to happen. And we have to assume the starting point that whoever's reading this, whoever's going to be ingesting it, using it, referring to it, has no prior experience of your community, of your activity, of your area, or even of a charity. So it should be able to explain to somebody with no prior knowledge what it is that's going to be happening. Okay? Straightforward. This is what's going to happen. It should also give the rationale for that. Why is such activity needed? And why this idea? Why is it that your proposal, your ideas for the things that should be working are the right and the best things to do in terms of meeting those needs in the community? We also need a bit of assurance. How is this working in practice? What's the day-to-day running of it look like? And ideally, that should also include some kind of budget, some kind of financial model that says, this is how we make sure the charity can bring in enough money to pay for the bills to deliver the good stuff that we're intending to. It doesn't have to be a massively complicated forecast or financial budget. It could just be a simple one-page summary, but a start, something that says, we've thought about the money in this as well. We're realistic. And finally, why you? Why are you, as a body of trustees and the managers, the people you're employing in the charity, why are these safe pair of hands? Why should these hands be trusted with grant funders' money, with partnership agreements from other organizations, with public money from commissioners? Because this is half the battle. You can have a great idea, but if the people aren't right within it, it doesn't get enacted. Similarly, you can have the best people in the world, but if the systems and processes aren't right to harness their skills and expertise, it doesn't happen. And that's something we touched on a previous set of these videos around governance and being a trustee. So that's ideally what a plan should do. And if I'm reading a plan, and from time to time I sit on grant making panels, I sit with panels of people who decide about social investment, and I read loads of other charities' business plans. And this is what I'm looking for. What is it about? Why is that needed? Why this idea in particular? How does it work? Does the money stack up? And why you? If it can't answer those questions, then I push the plan back. So you can present that however you want. And what we want to do now is move on to this idea of how do we actually physically structure and present that plan. Now, some of you, again, in terms of those who've been involved with business planning processes before, will probably think it would have been quicker for me to read the historical novel War and Peace. If anyone's ever read War and Peace, congratulations. I know how tough it can be to wade through it. It's quite a tome. It took me over a year, but I got there in the end. If you haven't read War and Peace before, it's a good literary challenge to set yourself. But some business plans just go on and on and on. And okay, there's lots of information to be put in, but your audience, who's receiving this? If it's a specialist role you're inducting, then yes, it needs lots of detail. But if it's being presented as a part of a support to a funding bid, or if we've got a structure that we're saying, okay, we're refreshing the plan, we're trying to make this an open process, is having such a long document really the best way to do it? What if we had something more visual, something simpler and quicker? So what I want to introduce you to now is the idea of canvases as a way to approach planning. Now, some of you may have heard of canvases before, and the idea of a canvas, it's a plan on a page. You have a canvas, like a painting, and you paint the model, the idea within it. There's lots of them out there. And I want to introduce two to you in particular through this session. Although, again, go out there, have a search around, you can find lots of others. And the first one I want to introduce is called the Lean Canvas. Now, I quite like the Lean Canvas because it's structured with just a few simple prompt questions that are actually quite insightful. So we start on the far side of the screen. What's the problem? What are the problems that your charity is set up, is trying to solve? Okay? And then underneath that, the existing alternatives. How are people currently working around that? And then solution, what's your solution to this? What's your great idea for how this will work? Your metrics, your measures, what things will you bean count on to make sure that your solution is working in practice? We move over to the other side of the canvas now. What's the unfair advantage? What is it that you can do as a charity that other people can't in bringing your solution to work? The channels, how do you reach people? How do you deliver those services? What is it that helps people's lives get changed? And customer segments. So who's paying for this? Who's funding it? And then underneath that, if you are a new start charity or the charity starting a wholly new area of activity, who are the early adopters? Who are the funders and the commissioners who are likely to be the risk takers in this space? Then at the bottom of the canvas, where does money come in and go out? And in the center of it all, the unique value proposition. What is it that the charity is about in a concise, clear statement? That kind of powers it out that way. Now, that all sounds quite easy and straightforward. And you go, okay, but when I come to it, I'm really not sure what does it work like in practice. Well, let's pay homage to other people's examples of how they've worked it out. So what I'm going to do is I'll pause for a moment so you can pause the video and actually have a read through that yourself. And it gives you an idea of how you can approach creating this idea of a plan using a Canvas template, and you can do it collectively as a whole board of trustees. It's very quick and easy to agree these core subjects, these core defining content pieces. And then if there's paid staff, well, that's their job just to flesh it out. But at least then you've all got agreement. You've reached consensus on what it looks like. Now, I mentioned there was another Canvas I wanted to introduce you to, and it's this one from the Young Foundation here in the UK. And it's called the Social Business Model Canvas. And this is a bit different to the Lean Canvas, where we've gone through that and shown how it can be adapted for charities. Because the Social Business Model Canvas is based on the assumption that you are a social organization, charity, but there are some elements of trading activity that you're doing within it, which your charity is. And just as with the Lean Canvas, there are the segments and the prompt questions about how it works through. So again, just pause this video for a moment, have a look through it, and just familiarize yourself with it and see, okay, this seems to make sense. Now, for me, every canvas is different. Every canvas that you come across has something in it which is unique. So the Lean Canvas, for example, talks about the early adopters. Who are those funders, commissioners, customers even, who are going to take a risk on you because you're doing something very new? The Social Business Model Canvas asks, what are you going to do with the trading surplus that you're creating? So it may be that what you decide to do through this process is, you know what, we will actually create our own canvas. Or actually, as a charity, we've already got a business plan that's worked up and detailed, and it's in our induction pack. But this is a nice checklist to make sure it's not missing anything critical. So that's the idea of business plans. They can be quite useful. People often miss the point of them, and they don't have to be long, boring documents. But if you were paying attention at the start of this video, you'll remember, oh, hang on a minute. There was something about strategic planning. Well, don't worry, we haven't forgotten about that. We'll get to that in just a moment. But I didn't want to leave business planning just yet without saying, watch out for the potholes and the things that might trip you up as you go through the process. Now, what we've got here on the slide are just a few warning flags that are based on, like I say, my experience of supporting charities over the last 3 decades, develop plans, of sitting on grant panels and social investment panels, of doing various pieces of research into how charities approach business planning as well. And my idea here is not to say, oh, it'll never work because one of these things will trip you up. My purpose in sharing these is to help you think, okay, if these are the things that if we're not careful will trip us up, how do we make sure they don't catch us out? How do we make sure that the process is, if not enjoyable, then at least as unpainful as possible and manageable as possible? And part of that comes to setting a timescale for it. Very often, plans just roll on and roll on and roll on, and oh, we'll review it at the next trustee meeting. We'll send it back. It's just fix a date and go, whatever we've done by that date, that's it, because otherwise it will never be finished. There is an argument in terms of capacity of charities to say, well, there's a funded support program. Let's get a consultant in to write our plan for us. Fair enough. But it's your charity, not theirs. They don't know it like you do. So whatever they create will not be fully reflective of what you're really about. So take that with a pinch of salt. Sometimes people get carried away and they just put everything in the kitchen sink in it, and it's just not needed. Well, why do we need all this extra stuff? I have a general rule of thumb in business plans, which says if you're not sure whether you should include it or not, stick it in the appendices. Stick it as a footnote. Okay? If people want to know it, they'll look it up then. But if you're not sure whether people will or won't, some probably won't, so you'll turn them off by including it in the main body. Whoever's leading on the plan, again, we're human beings. We naturally try to gravitate to things we enjoy doing, things that we like. We try and avoid things that make us unhappy, bring us pain. So if part of the plan is about creating a financial model, a forecast, a budget within it, and the person leading on it really doesn't like doing numbers or finance, then there's a bit of a tension to work out there. But ultimately, the biggest risk in business planning for charities is that the plan gets written to suit the funder or the social investor. That means you've twisted the charity to suit someone else, someone other than your community, someone other than the people you're existing to support and to benefit. So never be afraid of saying to people, this is our plan, and it may not be entirely your cup of tea in terms of how it's formatted and what it says, but it's right for our community, because you as the trustees are the ones who have to live with this. So strategic plans, the second part then of this session on plans and being a trustee. This will be much shorter as we go through, just to reassure you. And strategic plans are all about, we've got a business plan. It's beautiful, it's very well written, lots of pretty pictures. How do we actually make sure it gets done? How do we put it into practice? A strategic plan is how the business plan gets broken down into tasks to get done, to make it happen. Yeah, just the bridging in between. So just as an example, again, just as we did with the canvases and the business plans, something which is a bit more visual might help break this down. So we simply say, okay, this is our charity, this is what we're about. And in our business plan, we're committed to certain goals, overarching goals, our charitable purposes, our charitable objectives. And how are we going to deliver those? What activities are aligned to each of those objectives, and who will do them, and when will they do them by, and what resources will they need? And that means then, from a management perspective, from a trustee perspective, it's a much easier check and balance to say, are we on track in delivering our plan? Because the business plan is now broken down into this is what we need to do by next month, by next quarter, by next year. And this is the named person who is leading on it. So Bob, Jill, Sarah, Bill, where are we up to on that? It keeps it focused. It keeps you on track. So hopefully in this session, I've helped you start to appreciate that business plans are not necessarily that dull, that they can have their uses. And that actually, if you're going to be a trustee, that keeps a good hand on and a good handle on the charity delivering what it's supposed to, that they're actually quite crucial. Hopefully, I've also shown how they can be adapted. They're not just a long, boring, static document that gets written once every few years. They're used on an ongoing basis. And with that in mind, don't be afraid about adapting it in terms of what suits you best. Because as we've seen through some of those examples, you can be quite visual in these plans. You don't have to be long, boring chunks of text. It can be interspersed with charts, with tables, with images, with video clips. It's your charity that you're leading. So it should reflect the culture, the values, the ethos of what your charity is about, and its community, and how the people within it and without it all work together to that end. So hopefully, as we come to the end of this session now, there's been something there which you found encouraging, something that's been practically useful, and something that's made you go, oh, okay, I'm going to go off and think about that some more. And in the induction pack as well, there will be copies of the charity's current plans as they currently are for you to review and go over. And as well, through the session, I've mentioned a few other formats that you can go off, just search up online. Use the image search, not just the regular web search. You'll find them much more visually that way. But otherwise, thanks for listening, and see you again.